Well, hello, money lover. I have with me today someone fantastic. Her name is Jess Robson. She's a coach who works with business leaders and their teams to expand trust and connection. Amazing. So they can move with more speed and purpose toward goals. Her work focuses on feelings. We're going to talk about feelings today, helping you grow your emotional awareness and emotional intelligence so you can work with your feelings instead of getting worked by them. Wow. There are moments I could use that. She's also recently launched a podcast called Too Many Feelings, Too Little Time, which helps listeners get unstuck and stop spinning so they can spend more time doing what really matters to them. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to chat today.
Yeah, I can't wait. Emotions and money are so intertwined. And, in my industry, for someone who calls themselves a financial advisor, the ability to even have a conversation about emotions seems rare. So
Right.
I think we're gonna have a good chat today. And I do I hate the phrase treat me like a third grader, but let's set the stage for this conversation with some definitions.
Totally.
Start with the basics. Where in the world I obviously know human beings have a lot of emotions, but where do they
Mhm.
come from?
Oh, man, and that is a question that people who study emotions and neurobiology and feeling, are literally still answering. So, this is what I love about love, hate, for lack of a better term, about working in the world of emotions is because the number one, I don't know if you wanna call it pushback or "yeah, but" that people would have about it is, "Are
Yep.
emotions even real?" And what we know I mean, thank you for the question. That's not
Yeah.
helpful to the people who are questioning the validity.
Yeah.
But what we know is that, number one, off the cuff, each of us as individual human beings out in the world, humaning around, we each have our own very distinct, very unique emotional experiences, emotional backstory, and emotional climate when it comes down to it.
Mhm.
Um, as a general um, let's call it like a generally accepted principle is how emotions happen is we actually have a physical input first. We have a felt sense somewhere in our body which triggers an emotion triggers a reaction that runs through our emotional brain, so the limbic center, before transferring forward into our prefrontal cortex, which is where our communication and rational thought live. And the tricky part
Is
about
that
our
when we get
emotion
messed up by them? Yeah.
literally, yes. So, it's that transfer from the limbic system forward into where, where language comes from, where rational thought, like I mentioned, and communication come from, is inside the limbic system is also part of our brain that's, the least evolved from prehistoric times.
Hmm.
So, our emotional brain, things get a little bit clunky and stuck up because our brain, that part of it is assessing for where there's a saber-toothed tiger
Mhm.
in, previous times,
Correct.
and constantly scanning for threat because it's working and it's doing its job to keep us safe.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, current day threats are social and emotional
Right.
mostly, right? And so we're
Less
interpreting.
saber-toothed tigery. More I
Exactly.
feel rejected-y.
There you go. You named it. Exactly. And that's where we get like that's where not wanting to get too far into it too soon, but that's where things can go a little sideways. Because if we were to just trust everything that came through our emotional brain and threw itself forward into, our language, into our actions, into our behaviors, we'd be taking a whole bunch of movements, taking a whole bunch of actions that probably wouldn't align with what we really wanted because we haven't fully processed what that part of our brain's really trying to tell us
Yeah.
and really thought through and gotten ourselves to a really integrated, rational state before moving. So emotions come through our body, come through the emotional brain, and then move through the rest of our system after that.
That was a good answer. I have more questions, we're just going to leave that one be and we may come back to it. Let's talk about three terms and hopefully provide some definitions here. So, and I don't know if these are synonymous. EQ,
Mhm.
self-awareness, and emotional attunement or regulation.
Mm.
Should we go one at a time?
Let's do
EQ, obviously,
it.
I know what it stands for. It's emotional quotient, which
Mhm.
comes from the IQ. So then people coined the phrase EQ. What do
Yep.
you mean when you say EQ?
So when I say EQ, I was trained in a specific emotional intelligence model.
Hmm.
And inside that model, we define emotional intelligence as a set of social and emotional skills that ultimately allow us to live, act, exist in a more effective state more frequently.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it takes it out of concept and turns it into tangible, actionable skills that literally anybody can learn.
So then is that synonymous with self-awareness?
Self-awareness is a skill inside emotional intelligence. It's
Aha.
actually an emotionally intelligent skill, and, like, specifically inside that model I talked about, the EQI 2.0, we name that skill emotional self-awareness. So it's a pretty,
Oh,
like, specific aspect of overall self-awareness, but I do see a well-defined or, like, an expanded sense of self-awareness as a skill, um, that serves our emotional intelligence.
okay. And emotional attunement.
So I will put emotional attunement and emotional regulation as separate.
Okay. Okay.
Emotional attunement, we could call that, I look at it two ways. So there's internal attunement or internal recognition. Again, this is another one of the skills inside emotional intelligence,
Okay.
being able to understand, identify, and discern distinct differences in our own emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and also witness and understand how our emotions affect people around us.
Aha.
Yeah. There's another
Oh.
sense of emotional attunement that we look more so in like a relational dynamic
Uh-huh.
where it's our ability, and it's an empathetic practice. Empathy is another one of these emotional intelligence skills, but it's to be able to look at someone else and understand or discern what emotional state they may be in. Not necessarily taking that on, but just be able to see what state they're in as well.
Okay. And I noticed some of the one of the tools you sent me, and we're going to make this available to listeners in the show notes
Mhm.
for today's episode, but you referenced the feelings wheel.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was part of a global organization called Entrepreneurs Organization. And each month we would update our small group from the feelings wheel. So there was this whole framework of updates we would do. And that was it was really informative for me to learn that there are people who struggle to identify their emotions. I don't struggle to identify my emotions. I sometimes struggle to control them.
You're like, "I feel them really well."
I know what it is. Yes, yes. This is why I've learned my major adulting skill is to learn that if I'm upset, wait, sleep on
Yeah.
it, but sleep on it before you send the email.
Oh my gosh, I'm such an advocate for write the email that you want to send and
Yes.
then send it to
Save it in
yourself.
drafts. Yeah.
There you go, yeah. Yeah, there's something about that for sure, and I think the feelings wheel is such an incredible tool. Like, I always put my hand up for being someone who really struggled with emotional identification. I
Mm.
grew up thinking it was like 3 emotions of happy, sad, or tired. By the way, tired is not on the emotions
Tired
or the
is not an
feelings wheel.
emotion. Yeah.
It's not an emotion. And getting a more, like, an expansive emotional language or emotional literacy, that
Oh,
tool, it's literally feelingswheel.com. It is incredible for being able to not only see how many emotions are actually identifiable, but then also to challenge ourselves. My friend Mackenzie Chilton, she's a previous therapist who's now a coach, and she used to always position when someone would say, I'm feeling X, happy, sad, angry. She'd go, okay, pull out the wheel. If you're angry, but you can't say angry, what other word are you? And this is where we get into that, like, I call it fun because it's my thing, the fun practice of getting more granular about what it is we're actually experiencing, what it is we're actually feeling.
right. Right. Okay. Well, feelings is fascinating. And let's tie it to money.
Yeah.
Money. Oh my goodness, it's an emotional topic. I
I
mean, and I think more so for women, although I'm not sure if I just talk to more women or if they're more
mm,
open with me. Like, I'm not saying that that's a fact, but why do you think money turns out to be such an emotionally charged topic?
I sense that there's emotional charge behind money, and I will point people in the direction of people that I know that work on money story a lot more frequently.
Mhm.
But from what I understand, and even from a little bit of the personal work that I did about understanding my own money story, is the emotion comes from experiences that we watched around money growing up and the story we tell ourselves about what that means about us, what that means
Mhm.
about people in the world. And it's through the storytelling about what money means or what we mean in relationship to money that causes this emotional attachment, that increases our shame, that amplifies guilt, that tells people the story that, or owns the emotion of disgust around money, whatever it is that comes up for people. I really do see how story amplifies feeling or amplifies emotion and then makes it really real for people, which I can only imagine is something that's nuanced to tease through when you're working with your clients.
It is all the narrative, it runs the show, I
Mm,
experience with people, myself and people. The narrative runs the show until you're willing to look at it as a narrative, but then all the time you spend not dealing with it, the repression becomes another thing. It's like this
mhm.
cage that people live in about
Yeah.
money.
Mhm.
And what I've learned, I mean, I've been talking with people about money for years. The vast majority of us, I mean, I would go so far as to say 80% of us are miswired when it
Yeah.
comes to money. There's like a
Mhm.
dysfunction to it. Of course, everyone's dysfunction is unique. And so I find that for many people, when you go with your gut about
Mm.
money, we go awry, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say about that? About the we have so much in society today. We've made so many advancements,
Mhm.
and yet some of the doctors and scientists making the medical advancements are making mistakes with money.
Yeah.
Why do you think that? How do you explain miswiring like that?
Ah, gosh, when it comes to the wiring itself, I think there's what I understand about the way that our brain works around decision making,
Mm,
has to come down to the things that we expose ourselves to, and then how much we're willing to try different things without proof that it's gonna work.
ooh, that's
Does
juicy. Say more about that.
Well, what I witness in a lot of the coaching that I do with the clients that I work with is we get stuck in habitual patterns. So whether that is, and I've been open with this, like I don't coach people on finances or on money, and so I put it in
Sure.
the context of um, uh, habits or ways that they show up at work, actions or behaviors that they use with their team, ways that they operate to get heard around the boardroom table. Whatever it is that you're noticing, where there's like a kind of consistent or habitual pattern. So, what I always look at with folks is what's the action that you're taking that's consistent or persistent, and what's the outcome that you're getting? I'm getting heard because I get loud when I'm trying to get a point across. We'll just use
Yep.
that as an example. So, those people, or in these situations, it's often that they have an experience that if they wait to speak at the boardroom table, that they're asked to talk because they always talk first. And so there's stress for them between wanting to say something and then sitting back and letting other people contribute. The more people allow themselves to be exposed to that challenge or that change of doing something differently,
Mhm.
or they're allowing themselves to have opportunities to find success, i.e., the outcome they're looking for through new avenues. But it's that
Mhm.
space in between of willingness to try something different, even if the thing that even if the thing they're doing doesn't get them what they really want, trying something different seems scarier or more challenging than going with what they know and just getting a mediocre tongue twister outcome more of the time. So
This
that's what I
sounds sorry to interrupt you.
you're good.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like, the experience I had when I hit my own financial rock bottom. And I've shared about this on this podcast many, many times, but it was like I really got clear that my behavior was a set of patterns,
Mhm.
and that that the behaviors were producing bad results, and that if I wanted to produce different results, I needed new behaviors. And so I
Yes.
just got like really awkward. I just started doing stuff I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing the opposite of what I used to do.
Yes. Yep. Nailed it.
uh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
my view of it now is that it was all fruitful, but I think in the moment I was like terribly strange to people.
yeah, and it feels so uncomfortable to go outside of what you know, even if you can see that it's not working or it's
Yeah.
making like it's exacerbating the issue. And that's the we talk about it. I mean, I talk about it with folks who are kind of in these developmental pivots. Much like you said, we always talk about doing the one opposite action, right? So
Oh.
if I keep on cutting people off around the boardroom table, if I keep putting my hand up first, what's the opposite action? I sit back and like some people, you can do it on Zoom when you turn the camera off, literally need to hold their lips shut. Simply as this like gentle exposure to trying an opposite action,
Uh-huh.
right? So let's say, like, I noticed at one point that I had an overspending issue and that I was spending or shopping online when I was feeling a little insecure. I was able to pick up on the nuance of that over time.
Mhm.
And so I noticed like I would open a cart on a website and the minute I would get to the like checkout page, the one opposite action was to close it down.
It's
And that's
powerful.
and it felt strangely large in the moment because I was in such this repeated habit of that just like, "Oh, this will make me feel better, it'll make me feel better." It never did. And I think that's the opportunity is what's the opposite action?
I
And
like
what's
it.
one thing I could try that's different? And then the flip side to that, and you mentioned it, and I love that you use the word awkward. I use the word clunky. People use the word like it feels like friction or that there's a big rub in trying something new. That's grounded in this principle that Dr. Dan Siegel developed called the window of tolerance. And I call it like, how much capacity for tension each of us can hold.
Mm.
And the goal that we're creating with people or people that I'm working with, especially when it comes to how we integrate our emotions into our decision making, into how we show up um, out in the world, whether that's, professionally or personally, is we're constantly working on how do we expand or open up our window for tolerance or how much intense emotion or stress we can handle while still being the version of ourselves that we want to be, while still taking the actions that we want to take that align with our values, that keep us in integrity with what we're committed to. And how do we also experience more, let's call them like extreme emotional states, but find ourselves able to come back into that regulated, integrated, more open, and more whole sense of ourselves?
I think for many people, most people probably, when they start to examine their financial life, the emotions are big.
Hmm.
They start out pretty darn big.
Yeah.
Um, what is your coaching? What is your advice or what is your thought process around how should I interact with as a human being these huge emotions, which make me want to do things in the moment, and then inevitably, most of the time, I regret them later. And I'm probably speaking for many people who are listening, right? How do I how do I conceptualize that?
Yeah. The one thing I'll absolutely say off the cuff and off the top, feeling big feelings can be really, really scary. And I think that's a number one reason why we stay in patterns that ultimately don't work over the long run because exposing ourselves to the bigness of certain feelings isn't something we're taught all the time, you
Mhm.
know? Mo I mean, I was a bit of a what I like to call a champagne bottle kid. I would rather push things down and shake the champagne bottle and be really, mm, on edge quite frequently
Oh,
rather than feel into something, allow it to be there, understand or learn what I could from it, and then move on. And that's what I learned about emotional regulation and integration and processing over time. But if
uh-huh.
we're just beginning to feel into some of these bigger feelings, there's different ways where learning to interact with them. So, what I've experienced around big feelings is first of all, they can be incredibly scary for a lot of people to feel, especially if
Mhm.
it's something that we're touching in on for the first time and we don't have a lot of experience in that space of feeling emotional distress or emotional friction. My friend Ashley Broder, she's a psychotherapist out of Toronto, Ontario, and she recently introduced me to an acronym that was offered up by Tara Brock, and it's RAIN. And for people who are just starting to, identify that there's a big emotional experience going on in relation to finances, in relation to money, or anywhere that they're noticing it, this is a really accessible way to start investigating, feeling safely, investigating, and then knowing what to do with a feeling as it arises. So the R in the RAIN acronym is recognize. Can I simply recognize that I'm having an emotional reaction, a real emotional response to something that's coming up? You might feel it in your physical body. You might feel your heart start to beat faster. You might feel your throat start to get tight, shoulders. I get a lot of my emotions in my traps and my upper back.
Oh, wow.
So that's where my body normally feels it first. Some people will get like an unsettled
Mine are in my
stomach.
stomach.
Yeah, I was just going to say tight tummy. Then the A in it is to allow. And I think this is where a lot of us have the opportunity to do a little bit of slowing down and allowing the emotion to be there. It's so human and so natural for us to find a vice to feel better in the moment. But what that does is it's bouncing us off our emotions and keeping us in patterns that we talked about that might not work. And it doesn't give the emotion a chance to give us a little bit of the insight it's trying to poke through the dirt, if you think about it as a seed.
Mm,
So, in allowing the emotion to be there, it doesn't mean we have to do anything with it. We simply have to recognize it's there and then give it a second to do its thing. And if we can sit with it, we then have the opportunity to access the I, which is investigate. And in some situations, whether it's a really, really big feeling or too overwhelming, investigating it, that's where some people might notice that they could use like an expert insight to help them process it through or do that investigation piece. That's where counselors and therapists sometimes come into play and can be really supportive. Um, Other times, if it's a lower, intensity emotion or it's just something that's there that we can get curious with, we can ask, okay, what's this about? What's it connected to? What's here for me to understand? Um, and then the N is nurture. What can I do that would be really nurturing for myself?
hmm.
How can I take care of myself in this moment, knowing that I've got something going on? I might not know everything I need to know about it yet to take my next step in an integrated, aligned, or purposeful way. So, what could I do for myself that would be really gentle? And this is a little bit of what we would consider like preliminary emotional regulation skills. Deep breathing. Breath work is an incredibly important skill, and when I'm talking about breath work, it's literally taking a deep breath through your nose for 4 to 6 counts, holding it for a couple counts, and then a long, slow exhale, and doing that
Mhm.
4 or 5 times is a really nurturing thing for our nervous system to slowly start to calm and regulate. Other people, it's stepping outside, getting into nature, going for a walk.
Mhm.
For some people, might be meditation, but how can we nurture ourselves inside that experience too?
When you said you were a champagne kid, that's what I thought you were talking about, drinking champagne to stop feeling
I
emotions.
mean, I'm not saying I didn't, but that's what I talk about vices, is we're in so many different ways, like, I had a really long day or I had a really rough week, I need a drink. And there's no shade or shame. I consume and people that do, people that don't, all good. It's simply there are so many different ways that we numb ourselves out a bit
Right.
from the different life experiences that we're having. And again, I know the bigness of what I'm asking people to do in this, especially in bigger feelings, but what if we sat with it for just a second and instead of numbing it out, trying to smooth it over, trying to shove it down, we let it be there long enough for us to know what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah.
I'm nervous because this feels really important to me. It feels really important for me to do something meaningful with my money so that I set up my family for a different future,
Yeah.
right? Like there's something there for us to take out of those feelings that are coming up and if like I'm going to say like if we had the courage and we're brave enough
Mhm.
to sit with it and put our bottle of champagne or glass of champagne or glass of whiskey to the side even for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
that's a really effective way to start to get into relationship with these feelings that come up and work with them in a new way.
I noticed, and you talked about narrative when we first started talking about emotions or story. I noticed for me, if I'm able to disconnect big feeling from
Mhm.
the story inevitably is making me worse off in the future.
Yes.
If I can
Yes.
just set it aside and feel the feel, it
Mhm.
helps. There's like the distance from the intense feelings.
Totally. Yeah, and
Uh,
there's the oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, what I would add to that is our thoughts often are the thoughts, the stories that we tell often pour like lighter fluid onto our emotions. And so the
Yes.
more we tell ourselves the story and the more intense it's going to get, the more worked up we're going to be. And the further away from the facts of the situation we get.
Right.
And in decision making, for example, just thinking about how we need both. We need external data. We need facts for a situation. We need our head. We also need our heart. We need the emotions to give us the data that they're there to offer us. But if we overplay either of those, if we were to completely ignore our feelings about something or the story, then we'd be missing out on something really useful to help direct us in a meaningful direction. But if we only lean into the story, we miss out on really important facts that could help us again make a more integrated, purposeful decision that serves the long term.
Right. So, one of the things that's very interesting in my world is how our emotions about investing. So, money is separate from investing. I mean,
Mhm.
investing is a subtopic of money, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotions around investing. More and more people are leaning into stock market investing. I mean, I started doing this 25 years ago, and you had to like really pitch people, some people on leaning into that, but it really is like in the zeitgeist now. And we have a model in my industry called the cycle of market emotions, market
Mm.
being the stock market. So the stock market goes up and the stock market goes down, and our emotions tend to go with the market. So at the top, we're elated, we're excited, everybody wants in, and at the
Yeah.
bottom, we're terrified, everybody wants out. Now, of
Right.
course, we don't know when it's the top or the bottom only in hindsight. We only
Mhm.
know as we look backward. But the facts of the case, as you were talking about, the data, the reality of it are that at the top, stocks are the most expensive and the only place for them to go is down. And at the
Mhm.
bottom, stocks are on sale. They're
Yep.
cheap. And the only place for the price to go is up. And yet, even some of the world's smartest, most successful people really struggle to internalize that. And just being
Yeah.
transparent, even I, as I watch the stock market go up, am joyful about that.
Yes.
Right. And I don't like watching my own accounts go down. I don't enjoy the process. I'm
Right.
intellectual enough about it to know that I'm not going to do anything about it, but I
Right.
suffer from the same thing.
Yes.
So, can you just address this phenomenon called our emotions are exactly the inverse of what they ought to be, and
Mhm.
how do we be about that?
Yep. I love this example because it really I mean, I don't love the stress and tension people feel in
Right.
the process of investing in that way. But what I love about this example is it really amplifies the necessity to not trust our knee-jerk emotion. And
Yeah.
why, like I was saying, it's so important to, yes, feel our feelings, take the insight from them, and also know that there is a lot more to look at outside of how we feel about something when it comes to making a sound. And when I say sound, I mean like values aligned, purpose driven, meaningful decision. So when I think about where you were sharing with like joy escalating as the market goes up,
Mhm.
that happiness for some people or the anticipation or the expectation that they would build off of that might take them past what they had set as an upper limit of where they wanted to see a certain stock go to or a certain amount that they were willing to wait to see if it hit. And
Sure.
then
Or they're imagining themselves as wealthy.
exactly, this is going to be the one and the multi-millions are going to rain down on me, whatever that is. And so when expectation, elation, joy, all of those really and, like, beautiful big feelings that we wanna feel
Right.
overtake our ability to see the, full picture, if you will, then that's that like more tactile data that I was pointing at that could take them out of integrity of the commitments that they made to their money or
Mhm.
to the whole reason they got into stocks in the beginning, their why.
Right.
And so that's that kind of practice of, yeah, we want to feel all those things. We want to be excited. We're not like emotional intelligence isn't it about becoming like an emotional cucumber, where we're always just cool and like just hanging out. It's about integration when it comes down to it. It's really about integrating, okay, yeah, I've got this really big feeling. Where do I need to ground myself? What is it that I need to remember that I was initially committed to, or that's like, how am I grounding myself and my values around this so that like I can be really excited and I can also be purposeful? Or I can be really nervous and I can also be really purposeful. And that's again one of these pieces of how we're holding capacity for intense emotions. I think we think intense
Uh-huh.
emotions and we think the more challenging ones to sit with, grief, stress, anger, frustration. An intense emotion can be mass joy or
Right.
massive elation, right? So the more we can hold those big feelings, but do it in an integrated way while where we are still rooted in our purpose, in our goals, in our values, in our vision, that's where we're able to kind of counter ourselves and go, "Yeah, I'm stoked, and
And
here's what I'm actually here for. Yeah, I'm totally freaked out right now, and I'm watching all my accounts go down, and what's the long term? What am I
right.
committed to here that's beyond this moment in time?"
When I first started in the business, I told one of my first clients who got really excited about watching her accounts grow in value. I said, cut something like, look at to the degree you're happy about the upswings, you're going to be sad about the downswings. So, like, knock it off kind of a thing.
Right.
Her reply was something like, okay, I'll try to stop feeling good about that. Thanks. I
You're
thought,
like, "Well, you're
I,
welcome."
I never said that twice, just so you know. I do learn. Um,
Self-awareness, yeah, expansion.
Um, okay, so a lot of our financial learning, because child's brain is very impressionable, money is
Mhm.
super conceptual, very hard. Anyone who's taught their kids about money or tried to, you realize that money makes no sense to a kid.
Got it.
And so we take on mindsets, attitudes, and emotions of money from our parents or the people who raised us, the people
Mhm.
around us. Money doesn't grow on trees. There's never enough money. Money is the root of all evil, these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And then sometimes people realize and have the opportunity to transcend what was possible for their
Mhm.
parents or the people that raised them about money. And I watch them block themselves. In other
Mm.
words, I can see that frontier and I could step into it,
Mhm.
but I don't want to basically be better than my parents,
Wow.
right?
Mhm.
Um, what what would you say about that? Or are we now getting into therapy?
I mean, yes. And there's so much like this is where, we let much like you were talking about, we let narrative and story dictate our possibilities,
Yes.
right? Where we really like for someone to be number one, for someone to be able to identify that and be able to see like, okay, this is actually something I've got baked in that's intrinsically not letting me, step into that frontier that you can see for them or identify or just make those moves and have it expand in such a massive way.
Right.
And that's where absolutely there's work to be done with the clinical professional that would be incredibly supportive because that's space that coaching doesn't really step into
Yeah.
in like past-based integrations and how to pull, those stories into the present, but not have them dictate your future kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, there's the
and
set of possibilities we wound up with,
mhm,
and then there's a set of possibilities we can create as thinking
exactly.
beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like in a really like beautiful way, I have this mentor, Suzanne Conrad, and she used to always in a similar and a parallel kind of discussion, we would talk about what are the gifts that our parents gave us and what are ones that we would want to give back.
Mhm.
And if I think about just even thinking about that being like,
Oh,
that's
like return, give back, like thank you, but no thank you.
yeah, yeah. And like, you don't ever have to tell them you're doing this, by the
Of
way.
course.
But
Not necessarily at the Thanksgiving table. Mom, giving this
by the
back.
way, yeah,
Don't like this
don't
one.
like, yeah. But that's like and outside of more deep processing stories that a professional would be able to help with, like that could be a conversation of like, you know, there's something maybe there about really wanting to honor their family or not be better than or otherwise. And so how could we, honor them and take values that they gave us or the gifts that our parents gave us, and then also give back the stories that aren't serving us? And what could
Yeah.
that do to give them a little more space to make decisions that could expand their, possibilities,
Mhm.
informed by what we as, intellectual individual people are choosing for ourselves versus what past-based stories need to choose or decide for us.
Let's round this out by talking about what I think is one of the most stressful situations for people, and that is talking about money with your romantic partner.
Mm,
And I was thinking about this before our conversation, when I was thinking about what to talk about. And I think there are really three big issues.
mm,
First, we fear bringing it up,
mhm,
right? Because what if they don't want to talk about it? What if they reject me because I brought it up? What if it's just super awkward? Second, we fear what they'll think about us and our
mhm,
financial situation, right?
mhm,
Because we measure ourselves by our own numbers. And third, I think we really fear knowing the truth about them.
mhm.
Right? Because
Yep.
most of us do want financial freedom. We want a partner who has some kind of financial security, more assets, less debts, right?
Mhm.
And we don't want to feel materialistic
Right.
if their financial situation makes us not want to hang out.
Mhm. Yep.
um I don't know, maybe you want to, if you want to talk about how you navigated this. I mean, I know you're married. I guess what it requires is courage for people to take on
Mhm.
and a willingness to think through frameworks that work for them in their life. But what would you say about that?
I mean, you said the C word, and courage is like that's the first thing that came to mind. It is incredibly courageous because, fear is pervasive, and fear
Yes.
is normally going to be there for most things most of the time. And being able to meet ourselves in it and choose to have those conversations anyways is incredibly courageous and incredibly brave. And jumping the void between sitting in the fear of financial conversations with, even if this isn't like a spouse, but like a partner, someone you're even just beginning to date, you're getting to
Mhm.
know well enough that there's a potential future there, to sit with all of those questions. What will they think of me? What will I think of them? Can we alchemize around this? And how would we bring together divergent views? Like all of those are open-ended questions, right? I think the thing to get moving in the direction of those conversations are a couple things. Number one, our own personal values and commitments.
Mhm.
And I feel like a broken record talking about that, especially with clients, because the number of times that
Totally.
I'm like, well, let's come back to your values and let's come back to the commitments and what are we making? Um, but that's the foundation of most of our ability to move through things like fear and things like, trepidation, whatever's there around a conversation we want to have, because fear in those contexts, it's pointing to something that's important. Right. And yes, like if we think about that part of our brain that's always scanning for potential danger and
Mhm.
the social implication between you and that person of, but what if they have a problem with my numbers, or what if I have a problem with theirs? Our brains are wired for connection, and they're also wired for like collective safety, right? So it threatens our safety inside that dynamic. But when we come back to our commitments to ourself, our commitments to our financial future,
Uh-huh.
and we can really sit in ownership of those things and then choose to ask to have the conversation to start. Not even get ourselves into what the conversation is going to sound like yet. But even just that first ask is a step in the direction of facing the
Baby
fear and
steps.
choosing exactly doing it differently, one thing at
Yeah.
a time, literally. And then I also like to think of Mel Robbins has this let them theory,
Okay.
that's really about like we can't control what people are going to do. We can only show up. And like I said, when we're grounded in values and commitments, we can show up with integrity to ourselves. We can be responsible for our thoughts, our actions, our beliefs, all of those things. And what people do with them is theirs. And so, inside of that, if we were to ask to have the conversation and we get into it and we're received, we'll say quote unquote negatively, let them receive it negatively. And then ask, is that someone you want to be with?
Right.
I mean, that's getting into relationship coaching.
Right.
But there is that kind of like, can we get rooted enough in what our values and commitments are and choose to have the conversation anyways, and then see who the person is around money and see what we do with it?
I say something semi-frequently, not because I think it comes up so frequently, but because I think it's so important to give yourself permission. I say it is okay to leave someone over money. It is.
Mm,
Now, I hope people don't have to do that very frequently,
yeah.
but we just are terrified that other people are going to think we're materialistic. You know, if he's got $300,000 of credit card debt, it's okay to say goodbye for now.
Mhm. Maybe figure it out and let's chat later.
Yeah, right. Like circle back.
Right.
Circle back.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And then your answer to that question just generated an additional question that is related to money, but it's also not. Why is fear so pervasive?
Oh, gosh. Our fear brain is, and I think this is one of those things that comes back to how our brain thinks that it's protecting us, right? That's what I was talking
Yeah,
about at the beginning, where it's like we're we're only exposed to so many things in life, and something new, something novel, a threat to our belonging, all of those different things. It's a brain's our brain's natural function to try and keep us safe. And in certain situations, it also functions to keep us small, i.e., not having the conversations that are really meaningful to us, not pushing ourselves into our financial possibilities, not stepping into a career possibility because too scary, too much. What does visibility mean? How will people perceive me? All of these thoughts that
right.
really take us out of our power when it comes down to it. So I think it's there because it's a part of our natural wiring in a
Yeah,
way that we get to, if we see it as an opportunity, come up against and go, okay, but what do I actually want? What am I
right.
really committed to? And how's this helping me? I like my a pal of mine, Alex Mazerel. She's a yoga teacher among many other things. And I was on a retreat with her a couple years ago, and she was talking about thought awareness. And if we really tuned in and listened to the thoughts that are going through our head, which is over 60,000 thoughts a day, we would see how many of them are negative and how many of them are fear-based. And this
So
is where
many,
so many of them, and
so
being
many.
meticulous about the thoughts we actually let take up mental real estate is annoying, and it's very subtle work,
Laborious. Yeah.
laborious, and that literally from countless podcasts that I've listened to from neurobiologists and people who study the brain and study habits, that's our job. Like that's the work. If we want to get closer to the things we want, is being way more tuned into what's going on between our ears and way more responsible for which ones we let take root, which ones we let take up space, and being, conscious of our language, conscious of the way we speak to ourselves, conscious of the language that we use to describe our world, all of those things. It all adds
Mhm,
up.
mhm. I've said before, I really do think wealth building is the final frontier of feminism, and
Amazing.
I think this learning ac to deal in an adult way with your emotions is the spear point of
Yes.
that you can't move forward or make major alterations in what's possible for you with money, until you have a sense of being able to manage the emotions
Yeah.
that come with money. Thank you so much. Say a little bit about how you work with people and where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, I work one-on-one in groups with teams, with whether you're a creative business owner, whether you're a business leader who has a group or a team behind them. And the work's really about helping people integrate emotionally so we can move faster as groups, as teams, and get more done when it comes down to it. If you're interested in learning more, whether that's about one-on-one coaching or about group opportunities or keynotes, you can get me at hello@jessicarobson.com, and we can get the conversation started there, or you can meet me over on Instagram at Jess Robson. And if you're into conversations about feelings. My podcast is Too Many Feelings, Too Little Time, and that's just 6 episodes in, so we're new, but having a great time
Ooh.
doing it.
All right. That's exciting. How cool to
Yes.
use your voice in that way. Okay, Jess, if your money were loving on you and writing you a thank you note or a love note, what would it be thanking you for?
My money would be thanking me for doing the emotional work
Yeah.
to work with it more thoughtfully. And it would also be thanking me for letting it do a job, for being intentional about where I put it, when, how, and why, and to giving it space to grow.
I think it would also thank you for closing the browser on the cart when you
That's what I meant, doing the emotional work to let it actually do some stuff for me and not just have like I was never a shoes gal, but it was like I can't even tell you the stuff that I bought emotionally. So yeah, closing the browser. It's thanking me for closing the browser.
Nice. Thank you so much for being here.
Such a pleasure.